Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Sitting here Monday afternoon, and y'all know college football dang close to be kicking off when we get the first AP poll top 25 college football rankings heading into the 2025 year. Now, this is how I'll start this episode. We break these rankings down every single Sunday in the middle of the season. Seeing how we haven't seen a single one of these teams take a snap in 2025 yet, I figured the best way to approach this episode is, let's just run this sucker down. Start at number one, work our way to 25, and talk about, the pros and cons to each of these football teams. I'll give some of my takes on some teams that I think are overrated and underrated as well. Just emptying the clip, emptying the notebook, fired up to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, y'all let it fly in the comment section. The best part about doing top 25 ranking discussions is the battlefield that takes place in the comment section. Look, I wouldn't want to have it any other way. Call your shot. It's the month of August. It's the time to call your shot if you're a college football fan. Let it rip in the comment section. Teams that are overrated, the teams that you have as darlings going into 2025. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, look, I'm going to try to be relatively concise, but I'm sure many of y'all know that ain't always my strength. Some teams before we get into the top 25 that I think can make some noise that are not in these rankings. You probably start with a team like USC. Like, if that defense takes a step and we trust Lincoln Riley to score points, I think people are sleeping on that USC defense going into 2025. I think Auburn's a team from a talent standpoint is probably a top 15 team in the country from just what we see on paper. Now, does Hugh Freeze translate that to wins on the football field? I'm not sure. I think Louisville and Georgia Tech, look, everybody's talking about Clemson and everybody's talking about Miami and the ACC. And look, rightfully so. Like, those are the two most talented teams in this conference. I think Louisville and Georgia Tech have the opportunity to make some noise as well. They're not in the top 25. Without further ado, let's get into number one. That's Texas. Now, there are so many people. One, this is a very popular pick as the number one team in the country heading into 2025, and I see the vision. The people that don't believe in Texas, I think, are focusing on the wrong things. Like, the narrative that Arch Manning has not proven himself at the college football level, although somewhat true. And I would argue that we probably have seen enough from him during his time at Texas and, kind of reserve duty or kind of plug and play duty over the last couple of years. Look, my take on Arch Manning is this kid was the number one player coming out of high school. He has marinated with Coach Sark in this offense for the last 2 years. I think there's a chance that he has better weapons around him than Quinn Ewers had in 2024. Why are we doubting Arch Manning? We really shouldn't be. If you have question marks about Texas, I think the Texas fans would tell you we ain't concerned about Arch. I think our bigger concerns about, hey, depth at tackle. Like, we're starting to get a little bit thin there. Are we going to be as dominant in the middle of the defensive line? You talk about, what Coach Sark has done with Texas and why they have, risen up the ranks of the college football landscape. To me, like, how dominant that defensive line has been a really big storyline. Now, look, they got edge rushers that can absolutely rip it up, headlined by Colin Simmons. Are they as dominant in the middle of the defensive line as they've been the last couple of years? That's probably the biggest question mark about Texas. Penn State coming in at number two. Like, there is a laundry list of things to like about Penn State. I look at Penn State and Clemson. And, maybe we'll tackle both of these teams together. They are, two of the most proving commodity football teams going into 2025. You look at Penn State, you look at Clemson and say, you kind of just know what you're going to get. Now, is it going to be good enough to win a national championship? Do they have the highest ceiling in all of college football? That's the question mark we have to figure out. But I look at Penn State and say, there are a lot of things you can look at and believe in right away. And Drew at quarterback. Offensive line that should be a bunch of ass kickers. Two of the best running backs in the country. A defense that, although you have to replace Abdul Carter, you got a lot of good football players on that roster. There's a lot to like about Penn State. That's probably why Penn State's number two and Ohio State's number three. Like, I would argue, look, if Ohio State and this football team, it all comes together, this is a team that can compete and win a national championship. There are just more questions that we have for Ohio State than we have a team like Penn State. Look, to me, with Ohio State, everybody, again, similar to Texas, getting really wrapped up in the quarterback conversation. Like, there's two blue chip quarterbacks, one a 5-star and Julian Sayin. With Ryan Day running this football team, with Jeremiah Smith on the outside of play. It ain't just Jeremiah Smith either. Ohio State's got a loaded wide receiver room. My question mark is not, does Ohio State get good quarterback play? Pretty confident that they'll figure it out. I think I could run quarterback at Ohio State and just throw the football to Jeremiah Smith. I think the bigger question mark is, and that's a joke, by the way, I'm 5'8", 160. I think Ohio State would struggle with me at quarterback. What my biggest question mark is for Ohio State is, one, you got two new coordinators in a defensive line that, look, I think Ohio State's defensive line is going to be good. That's something that's been misinterpreted. I don't have question marks whether or not it will be good. It's how good will it be? And nobody talked enough about it. Ohio State's defensive line last year was one of, if not the best units in the country. Are they going to be that level? Do they have that talent? But more importantly, do they have the depth that they had last year? That was a large part of why that team was a national championship team. Do they have that in 2025? Also, hey, can Ohio State run the football like they did last year? I mean, not only because you lose two of the best running backs in the country in Travion and Quinshawn, you also don't have Will Howard, who is a massive asset in some of those short yardage situations for Ohio State. If you might have that with Lincoln, but if Julian Sain's your starting quarterback, you're not going to have that, ace in your back pocket of Will Howard being able to run the football and move the chains on some of those third and short situations. Very good football team, just a little bit more questions about Ohio State than we had 12 months ago. To me, it's Clemson. Clemson's going to score points. They got an experienced offensive line with one of the best quarterbacks in the country, with one of the best wide receiver rooms in the country. The big question mark, hey, we know Clemson's going to be good. How good are they going to be? What can Tom Allen do with this defense? Now, I look at Clemson's defense and say, from a personnel standpoint, there's a bunch of NFL dudes. Are they going to be a top 10 defense in the country like I think their roster tells me they should? They were nowhere close in 2024. Can Tom Allen in year one snap his fingers and create a top 10 defense at Clemson? Because if they do, if they have a defense that plays the way I see on paper, this is going to be a very good football team that can win a national championship. Georgia at number 5. The most question marks we've had about a Georgia football team, maybe since Kirby Smart's tenure. That doesn't mean they're going to be bad. They just got a lot of young talent that we don't necessarily know what kind of football players they are. Gunnar Stockton coming in at quarterback. My bigger question is, can we get back to running the football? Georgia was outside the top 80 running the football last year. Wide receivers couldn't catch a cold. Like, everything we're hearing coming out of fall camp for Georgia is, we think the offensive line, maybe on paper, won't be better than it was last year, but if they stay healthy, we think they have a deeper offensive line. Maybe they can take a step collectively as a unit. You've heard great things about Noah Thomas. You've heard really good things about Zachariah Branch, and you've heard some really good things about some other young wide receivers on this Georgia football team. Have they fixed the problem with the lack of difference makers on the offensive side of the football, wide receiver? I think the feeling within Georgia's program is they have. Notre Dame at number 6. If they get the quarterback play necessary, they are a national championship contending team. And here's the thing I'll say with Notre Dame is, look, whoever wins that quarterback battle, I feel pretty dang confident they're going to have success, right? You're going to be behind an offensive line that I think can meaningfully take a step in the right direction. They had to play a bunch of young cats last year. All those young cats are now going into year 2 and year 3. That offensive line should be very good. You're going to have a run game that rivals anybody in the country. This is probably the best group of pass catchers that Notre Dame has had in a very long time, to go along with an OC, Mike Denbrock, who I think is one of the best in the game. So we have question marks about the quarterback position. CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie, is it going to be good enough? Whoever wins that job is going to be in a situation where it should be pretty easy for them to have a lot of success. Notre Dame's defense should be really dang good. That ain't no news flash for anybody. Oregon at number 7. I put Oregon in a very similar conversation with Georgia. Oregon's got a ton of talent. This is the most talented Oregon team that Dan Lanning has had. And I know a lot of people probably raising their eyebrows at me. Look, go look at what Oregon has recruited. Go look at the athletic profiles they have stacked over the last couple of years. It's not a bunch of known commodities. You got a bunch of question marks about who the difference makers are going to be. They got a lot of potential answers. Here's what I'll say about Oregon. Oregon last year, 12 months ago, you kind of knew what that team was going to be. It was a bunch of veteran guys with Dylan Gabriel at quarterback, and you just was the ceiling high enough. And it wasn't. Like Ohio State's ceiling as a football team when they started playing their best football was higher than anybody else in the country. I think Oregon's ceiling as a team is higher than it was last year. Now, can it reach that ceiling? That's to be determined. We got a lot of young guys that we need good football from. I think Oregon can do some damage if it all comes together. And they got to schedule it in the month of September before they go on the road to Penn State to start playing their best football. Alabama at number 8. The selling point for Alabama is, Ty Simpson, the presumed starter, taking over this Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb offense, being a better fit for what Alabama wants to do. I think this Alabama defense should be pretty dang good. LSU at number 9. To me, LSU is one of the most complete football teams that you see in the country. And look, a lot of teams above LSU, you have question marks at quarterback. You don't really have that with Nuss. I mean, and you think he has the pieces around him. And I think this LSU defense has the chance to be really good. Like Blake Baker, there's a reason that LSU is paying Blake Baker the way they're paying him. I think he's one of the best defensive coordinators in the country. Last year, he did not have the pieces to do what he wanted to do. I think he does this year. Like the general vibe coming out of LSU during fall camp is we feel like we hit on our transfer portal additions on defense. This defense should be really good. My big question mark is, does the offensive line gel quickly enough, and can they run the football? Now, I look at it and say, look, LSU has recruited the offensive line position well. They made some really nice portal additions. They have one of the best offensive line coaches in the country. Does it all come together quickly enough for LSU to go out and win a national championship? Miami at number 10. Very similar conversation to LSU at number 9. I think Miami, the general consensus is you bring in a new DC. You bring in some pieces on the defensive side of the football through the portal that sound to be like Miami's very pleased with. How big does the step on defense, or how big is the step that Miami takes on defenses? I don't know if that made a ton of sense. Guess what I'm trying to say is we think that Miami's defense is going to be better. How much better is it going to be year one under Corey Heatherman with a lot of new pieces? Look, Miami's offense, I know people want to run their mouth about Carson Beck and the question marks we have about him. He's going to have a dominant run game to lean on. Like, this might be the best offensive line that we see in the country with a 3-headed running back room that we think is going to be really good. You got some question marks at the pass catcher position. The thing is, I don't think that's going to be the engine of the offense like it was in 2024. I mean, Miami threw the ball just as much as anybody in the country last year. I think they're going to run the football as much as anybody in the country this year and kind of lean into the new engine of the offense. And look, Carson Beck with a run game to work off of, I feel good about it. Arizona State at 11. Like, you got to believe what Kenny Dillingham's doing. Illinois at 12 is it's like a Penn State Clemson light. You kind of know what you're going to get from Illinois, just how good is it going to be. But there's a lot to be said about returning production and kind of a known identity to this football team. 13, South Carolina. When you have a quarterback like Lenore Sellers, you have the chance to make a lot of noise. What I think people are missing about South Carolina is it's just Lenore Sellers and the buck stops. I think this is the best offensive line that Shane Beamer has had at South Carolina. I think he got difference makers around Lenore Sellers in a way that you did not have last year. Now, there will be people who follow this sport closely that are looking at me and saying, what difference makers are you talking about? South Carolina didn't make no additions in the portal. They love these freshman wide receivers. They think Nick Harbor has taken that step going into year 3. My bigger question with South Carolina is, what's the defense going to be like? Like, is the defense – the South Carolina's defense was the real deal last year. Are we going to be even close to as dominant as we were last year? That's the question you have about South Carolina. Then Michigan, look, defense going to be really, really good. Bryce Underwood's going to be really, really good. The question for a lot of Michigan fans, and this is kind of what you hear coming out of fall camp, is not, is Bryce Underwood good enough to win games as a freshman? The question is, does Michigan have enough around Bryce Underwood to allow him to be successful? Like you see the Trevor Lawrence comps to Bryce Underwood, even if he is Trevor Lawrence as a freshman, which is a very high standard to reach. You know, Trevor Lawrence had a very good running back in the backfield, was throwing to T. Higgins and Justin Ross as a true freshman. Are we going to get that level of playmaking around Bryce Underwood at Michigan? Probably the question mark. Can they get back to running the football they did in 2023? That's probably the question that I have. Take a little bit of pressure off your true freshman quarterback. Florida at 15, underrated. And this is the one I really like. I haven't really said underrated, overrated for the first 14 teams. I don't mean I have some small gripes with the issue with the rankings, but nothing big. I don't get why people are sleeping on Florida the way they are. Now, the reasonable explanation is, all right, you don't trust Billy Napier as a head coach, which is fair. I mean, you got DJ Lagway, quarterback, who we know can be one of, if not the best quarterbacks in the country. It sounds like they love what they have in the wide receiver room. A veteran offensive line that played very good in November, pretty much returned the whole unit. Really good running back in the backfield with Jaden Baugh, in a defense that has multiple potential top 50 NFL draft picks, especially in the front seven. Like, what are the boxes that are we not checking for Florida? From a personnel standpoint, I see Florida as the top 10 team in the country. Fair question. Is Billy Napier the guy to maximize this unit? That is a question we'll find out. I like Florida a lot. I like Florida a lot in terms of what we see on paper. SMU S16, I think this one is, probably fair. I might be a little bit lower on SMU. I love Rhett Lashley. I like Kevin Jennings at love Kevin Jennings at quarterback. Are we good enough along the lines of scrimmage? You have to replace some really good football players on the defensive line that were on this roster in 2024. That's kind of what separates these teams. It's one thing to have a quarterback that you like and have some playmakers on the outside. Can you hang along the line of scrimmage with some of these other top 25 teams that we see? Kansas State, Steady Eddie. Does Avery Johnson take the step? I mean, talk about dark horse to go out and win a Heisman Trophy, or at least be in that conversation. That's Avery Johnson. That's how talented this kid is. But it was a little bit of a roller coaster year one as a starter. Do you get a step from Avery Johnson? Because if you get a step and you get a big step, Avery Johnson he's got some tools as an athlete to be really, really dang good. Oklahoma at 18. Defense should be really, really good. And that's why I'm okay with having Oklahoma still in the top 25. There are a lot of people say Oklahoma went 6-7 last year. Why are they a top 25 team? Well, look, the defense should be a top 20 defense in the country, maybe even top 15 on offense. That was the big bugaboo. Well, you made the two most important changes you can make. You got a quarterback in with John Mateer, and you got a guy in Ben Arbuckle coming in to run the offense that I think is one of the best in the game. And you have a quarterback in John Mateer where it's like, look, this is a perfect fit because Oklahoma is not going to be elite on the offensive line. They're going to need to be better than they were last year if this team's going to be a top 20 team in the country, but they're not going to be great. They're not going to be elite. Well, you have a quarterback that can make your offensive line look good in terms of getting involved in the run game, in terms of extending plays outside the pocket. Look, if you put Carson Beck at Oklahoma, I probably wouldn't have Oklahoma in the top 25. That's not a shot at Carson Beck. It just would be a really funky fit. I mean, Carson Beck going to Miami with a good run game and a good offensive line, and John Mateer coming to Oklahoma needing to be a little bit more of a playmaker. It's a really good fit. It's the exact kind of quarterback that Oklahoma needed because you need a quarterback that can provide the spark, that can be the engine of the offense. I think they got that guy. Texas A&M at 19. Sneaky, man. This is the first year in a while that Texas A&M kind of just flying under the radar. Like nobody really talking about them. They're in the top 25, but they ain't top 10. They ain't really talking about it as a playoff dark horse. Here's the thing with Texas A&M that makes me a little bit higher. Again, I'd probably say maybe a little bit underrated here. They got an identity. Texas A&M, especially in the Jimbo Fisher years, they always got a lot of preseason hype because you liked the talent they had on paper. They never had an identity. You didn't really know how the team was going to look every single year. Like Mike Elko in year two, number one, I expect the defense to get better. I think Mike Elko is too good of a ball coach to have that defense perform the way it did sometimes in 2024, especially with all the continuity and returning production you return. Everybody's a little bit more comfortable going into year two of Mike Elko. On offense, we gonna run the piss out of the football, and we know how it's gonna look. We got a talented running back room. We got an offensive line that is a bunch of butt kickers up front. You got weapons on the outside that I think better fit what Texas A&M wants to do with the quick game and yards after the catch ability. The pieces fit more. I don't even know if this is the most talented Texas A&M team we've seen, but the talent fits what they want to do at a much higher level. I see the vision. I see the identity of this football team in a way that we haven't seen in past years for Texas A&M. Indiana at 20. Can't argue with it. You know what I mean? I don't think you can. Kurt Signetti, he just wins. And like at this point, it's like you can look at the roster all you want and pick holes in it. They got some dudes. Now, I'm a big fan of Mendoza at quarterback, and they got dudes at all three levels on the defense side of the football. Can they repeat the magic of 2024? We'll see. Ole Miss at 21. I think this is fair. Like I've seen Ole Miss in top 15s, and I disagree. 21 is probably fair. Austin Simmons, look, my question marks with Ole Miss don't have a lot to do with Austin Simmons. I think he's going to be pretty dang good. My question is, are we even close to as good as we were on the defensive line last year? Ain't nobody talk about it last year. Ole Miss's defensive line was one of the best units in the country. They were top 5 against the run. They were top 5 in sack percentage. There were not many defensive fronts that took over football games the way Ole Miss did last year. I don't know if they have that this year. They'll be solid. I don't know if they're going to be a top 5 defensive line in the country like they were last year. Iowa State at 22, another one of those teams that we kind of know what we go and get. Texas Tech, here's the thing at Texas Tech, why are they my pick to win the Big 12? Maybe a little bit underrated here. The lines of scrimmage. Texas Tech's always had some good quarterback play. They've had some difference makers at wide receiver. What sets them apart, at least in my opinion, going into the 2025 year in the Big 12 is we got dudes along the line of scrimmage. They might have some of the best line of scrimmage play, maybe outside of Utah, that you see in the conference. With the quarterback that you trust, with the running back in Quentin Joyner, who I think's a dude. There's a lot to like about Texas Tech, and they're clearly trending in the right direction. Tennessee at 24, just not necessarily a buyer. You can say this for Tennessee and Boise State because I think both of these teams were really good last year, but they are losing a good chunk of what made them really good. Ashton Genty's the answer for Boise State. Look, Boise State should still be solid, but I think we are underrating the impact that Ashton Genty had on this football team. Well, probably not underrating, but man, there was not a more important football player outside of Travis Hunter to a team than what Ashton Genty was for Boise State. And then Tennessee, even if the quarterback play is not a disaster, and I don't think you're exactly hearing the best things out of fall camp from the quarterbacks, you got question marks about wide receiver. And I don't think Tennessee did much to kind of address those question marks unless you get big year 2 jumps from Mikey Matthews and Braylon Staley. You got a true freshman starting at right tackle on the offensive line. A defensive line that was really good last year. I don't know if they're going to be really good in 20. I think they'll be solid in 2025. Are they going to be as deep and as impactful as they were last year? I don't know. I look at Tennessee and say you lose some really important pieces, and I don't think you had a good enough offseason to replace and answer some of the questions you had. And now you stack on top of quarterback and what presumably is going to be Joey Aguilar, who didn't even have spring practice to practice with this team. Here's the thing I'll say with Tennessee that's a plus is, in my opinion, Josh Heupel's kind of earned a little bit of our trust, right? Josh Heupel going to figure it out because he's a good ball coach. That's fair. That's the argument to keep this team in the top 25 because from a personnel standpoint, we're not necessarily sure if they're there. They got a really good coach, really, really good coach in Josh Heupel. And I'll say this, if Tennessee can keep it together in 2025, watch out for this team over the next couple of years. That's probably what I'll say there. We'll close it out there. Again, some teams that I think probably should be on this list. A team like Baylor, I think, is going to be dangerous. USC, I think Auburn has the chance to be dangerous. A lot of teams that can make some noise. There's a lot of parity in the sport this year, which should be really, really fun. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Just absolutely ripped through it. Just gave some of my surface level takes on each of these football teams. Let it fly in the comment section. Appreciate you guys. Be going to talk to y'all later. Peace.